Thanks to Politics in the Pub for putting this on. I think how we deal with our children, particularly our children in detention, is a kind of marker, if you like, for how progressive we are as a civilised society. I too acknowledge that we're meeting today on the land of the Gadigal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. And when you're talking about the need for Indigenous justice, there's no part of our society that makes it plainer that we're failing to give Indigenous people, Aboriginal people justice than our corrective services institutions, our jails, both for juveniles and adults. And there are plenty of statistics you can give about the misfiring of our correctional systems and our jails when it comes to, in New South Wales, the proportion of Aboriginal people in jail. But I'll just start with just, I think, one core disturbing statistic. Aboriginal children in New South Wales make up less than 3% of the population of children in New South Wales. Yet, over the last 8 years that I've been tracking the data, the proportion of children in our jails who are Aboriginal has tracked up from about 47% to now about 53% of the children in detention are Aboriginal children. And I'll just go back to that starting point. They make up less than 3% of the overall population of children in New South Wales. There are all sorts of ways you can crunch the numbers and look at it, but the likelihood, for example, of a young Aboriginal man, and I'm not just talking here about children, but a young Aboriginal man up to the age of 35 being in jail, is something like 40 times more likely to be in jail than the non-Aboriginal counterpart at some point in their life. It's an extraordinary injustice, and it happens on a routine level. Is there any good news when it comes to the number of Aboriginal children in our jails? I've said before, the proportion has tracked up from about 47% to about 53% in the last 8 years. There's one good piece of news, which is the sheer number of juveniles in detention has reduced over that same time, from the mid-300s down to, on any given night, and the numbers fluctuate because a lot of the juvenile detention population is a remand detention, being held for a short time awaiting trial, sometimes a longer time waiting trial, but the numbers fluctuate obviously on a nightly basis. It was around about 260. So from the mid-300s to just about 260 last year, but I understand it's been tracking up over the last few months, and it's probably closer to 290 tonight as we're discussing the issue tonight. So 290 children aged from anywhere from 13, but up to the age of 18. There are a small number of young adults. There are discretionary reasons why children who have been detained in the juvenile detention system can remain in the system to the age of 21. There are a handful of those, but predominantly children aged 14, 15, 16, 17. About 290 will be in our jails tonight as we're having this discussion. And about over half of those will be children who identify as Aboriginal. So it's an extraordinary injustice to our First People, and it's also an indictment on us that we have so many children in jail. Assuming that we have a system that is going to put kids in jail, and there seems to be a broad political consensus, not a consensus that I sign on to, but otherwise a broad political view in our state and federal parliaments, that part of the way we deal with children who are seen to misbehave is we put a proportion of them in jail. Of course, when you track these children's life arcs up to the point that they find themselves in jail, an extraordinarily high proportion of them have lives of poverty, have lives of physical abuse and sexual abuse. And that life leads to them offending, can be addiction problems, and then what can then be a lifetime journey in and out of the corrective systems can start. And it starts at a very early age for many people. Is jail the right response for juveniles when they're beginning that arc? You know, that, and then the almost inevitable response we get from the system that just cycles people through the corrective service system for the rest of their life? I think not. I think absolutely we should not be jailing anything like the number of children we do. But nevertheless, that's the system we have at the moment. One of the reasons there was a minor, again, to talk about some good news, one of the reasons we had a minor downward movement in the number of juveniles in detention was there were reforms to the Bail Act that passed the Parliament in 2014, came into effect in 2015, and gave juvenile defendants 2 shots at bail. 2 shots at bail. If they lost their first one, they had a second chance. Adult detainees only get 1 shot. If they miss that shot at bail, that's it. They stay on remand till trial. Juveniles now have two shots at trial, and that can be essential at bail. That can be essential because the first application is made often soon after an arrest. Not all the evidence is to hand, not all the known factors are to hand, and an effort is made to obtain bail, and hopefully you would get bail in most circumstances there. But if it's refused, at least in the juvenile population, there's a chance to mount and gain some further evidence and have a second shot at bail. And that is actually seeing children being diverted from the criminal justice, from jails at the outset. The second important reform that came in that Bail Act was that it gave magistrates the ability to craft an order that said a child can be released on remand, can be released on bail from remand, can be released on bail awaiting trial if suitable accommodation is found. And for many children who are entering the criminal justice system, the key reason that they are refused bail and are held in jail awaiting trial is because they've got nowhere to live. Their family home has dissolved or is accompanied by violence or allegations of abuse. That's not a safe place or a permanent place for them to live, and a magistrate is simply told by the police there's no safe place for this child to live, and therefore, by default, the child goes into jail and is held in jail awaiting trial. What the system now provides is the magistrate can make an order that says the only reason bail is refused is because there's no suitable accommodation, and can effectively direct juvenile justice to work with FACS and other government agencies to find suitable accommodation. And as soon as suitable accommodation is found, an order can be just made in chambers. You don't have to go back to court, varying the bail orders to allow for the release and out in the community. Those 2 factors have had a significant reduction in the number of children in jail. They are good reforms, but as I said, the numbers more recently have been tracking back up, and I can tell you now there are a large number of Conservative commentators who want to wind back even from those modest reforms. That's the overall situation. In 2014 though, while changes to the Bail Act were being made, there were these small steps forward. New South Wales decided to close the carry-on detention facility for juveniles. And the carry-on detention facility was actually not run by Juvenile Justice, but was run by Corrective Services New South Wales. So it was run as part of the adult prison system. And to say that it was a dinosaur would be an underestimation. It didn't have a child-centred approach. It had none of that kind of core learning that you would hope you get about juvenile detention that we hope to have in the juvenile detention system. And carry-on, the number of inmates in carry-on had greatly reduced to about half of what its capacity was, and I think it was largely a financial decision to close it and move all the inmates from carry-on back into the juvenile detention system. And the inmates who were in carry-on, the juveniles who were in carry-on, were charged with the most serious offences. They were Category A inmates, or they'd been convicted of very serious offences. And we're talking very serious sexual assaults, attempted murder, those sorts of offences were the Category A inmates, either alleged offences or proven offences. So how did Juvenile Justice respond to that in 2014? Well, it responded to it in what I could only describe as a program of institutional abuse. It opened up the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program in the juvenile justice system. It opened it up at Cobham, out in Western Sydney, And the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program was, as I said earlier, institutional abuse. It was what was called a phased program. There was phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And as you eventually, an inmate worked, all inmates commenced at phase 0, or the assessment phase actually. They commenced in an assessment phase. That was a compulsory 2 weeks. And then after the so-called assessment phase, they went to phase 0. And then if they satisfied the phase 0, which could be 2 to 4 weeks, they would graduate to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and eventually, potentially, find their way out of the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program. How many young people went through that program? Well, we know that between May 2015 and May 2016, so for that 12 months, there were 66 young people who were put through the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program. And the initial cohort was entirely filled by children and juveniles who came from the carry-on detention facility. And I will just read you some notes. Sorry, just stopping there. I had heard about the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program, and I'll give you some details about what went on in it. But it was prolonged solitary confinement, prolonged abuse, the withdrawal of any reading material or external stimuli, no provision of food that can only be eaten as finger food, and fractions of the day outside of the cell, and including when outside of the cell, children being manacled and having no access to any external stimuli. I'll deal with it in more detail in a bit. I had heard deeply disturbing reports about it, and I didn't have any documents that specifically confirmed it, but there were rumours going around and anecdotal reports being given to my office that something was going terribly wrong in juvenile detention in New South Wales. So I asked, and it was at the time that budget estimates was coming up in September last year, and I put a series of questions in budget estimates to the Minister for Corrective Services, David Elliott. He's a fairly unreconstructed right-wing Conservative MP, the champion behind the $3.8 billion of additional spending that the New South Wales Government has committed to new and expanded prisons. That's his approach to the world. He may have a slightly more, I think he does have a slightly more, I wouldn't call it enlightened, but a slightly less medieval approach to juvenile detention. But nevertheless, that's his mindset. So I put to him, first of all, was he or his senior officers aware of the Mandela rules in relation to the basic international standards for the treatment of prisoners? And to say that the Minister had no idea would be an underestimation. He didn't know what the Mandela rules were. He wasn't aware that there were UN-mandated minimum standards. And his response when I asked him that question was something along the lines of, well, when I became Corrective Services Minister, I didn't get a briefing from the UN. Of course, one of the key rules in the Mandela rules is a prohibition on solitary confinement for juveniles, an absolute prohibition on it. He wasn't aware of that, didn't know the rules existed. And so then when I asked him, well, on how many occasions have juveniles been kept in solitary confinement in the last 12 months in New South Wales? And he then began some kind of definitional argument with me along the lines of, well, juveniles aren't really in solitary confinement because prison officers can see in the window and they can occasionally have communication with prison officers. And some of them have access to TV, and some of them have access to reading materials, so you wouldn't call any of it solitary confinement. And it eventually got to the farce where I said, well, we're defining solitary confinement as a juvenile being locked in the cells by themselves and unable to escape from that cell. On how many occasions have children been in solitary confinement for 24 hours or more on any given time? And after some to-ing and fro-ing, he eventually came up and said, well, 13 occasions in the last 12 months. There have been 13 occasions. 13. And I said, are you sure about that? He said, yes, and that's it. Of course, it's unlawful under New South Wales statute for any juvenile to be held in prolonged solitary confinement. So that was 13 instances where the law was breached. The allegation was that there had been administrative problems and that had led to that. But as a result of there being reporting on that, and I thought 13 was bad, but I thought it probably wasn't the full story, there was some reporting in The Guardian on it, I then started receiving some more specific information and contacts. And that included some very specific details about what was actually going on and had been going on in the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program. And I'll just give you one set of notes about that assessment phase. And remember, every juvenile who went into the Chisholm Behaviour Management had 2 compulsory weeks in assessment phase. 23 hours in the cell, 23 hours in the day in the cell. 1 hour out in the morning, sometimes 30 minutes out in the afternoon. Time out of the cell often cut short, and so it can actually be more than 23 hours in the cell. No school, no education, all meals alone in cells. No cutlery, so the only food that can be given must be eaten without cutlery, basically hamburgers and chips. Rec time is in a caged area with no grass and no room to run. All rec is done in handcuffs. Even basketball or table tennis, if it's allowed, is in handcuffs. There are no photos allowed, no TV in cells, no mixing with other detainees. If time is required to see a psychologist or their lawyer, that comes out of their external rec time. There are no family visits. And on the note that I have here, no hugs, said one young person. No hugs. That phase lasts a minimum of 2 weeks. Any default in that phase means it continues indefinitely. Go back and you start your 2 weeks again. If they come out of phase 1, out of assessment phase, they go into phase 0 with almost identical controls and rules in it. It allows for a slightly longer period out of cells. If they survive phase 0, they go to phase 1. Again, slightly longer time out of cells, but we're still talking more than 22 hours sometimes in the cells in phase 1. No external communication. Rec time was in a caged area with handcuffs. No cutlery. There was one child who repeatedly breached the controls in the Chisholm Behaviour Management Centre program by self-harming, swallowing pencils and the like. And whenever the child self-harmed, and you might think the self-harm was partly a response to prolonged solitary confinement, whenever the child self-harmed, they went straight back to phase 0 and started it again. As I said, in the period from the 25th of May 2015 to the 29th of May 2016, there were 66 young people on the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program. 41 of them, 2/3 of them, were Aboriginal, and 25 were non-Aboriginal. And they are spending weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks in this Chisholm Behaviour Management Program. The bulk of the program was done at Cobham. A small amount was done at Baxter. As I understand it, the program at Baxter was slightly more humane than the one at Cobham, but it was gross institutional abuse. Eventually, the Ombudsman commenced an investigation. There had been complaints and commenced an investigation, and then a report was written internally, and then the program was shut down with some embarrassment in the middle of last year. Shut down. Good thing, good outcome. What has happened since? Well, there's been no honesty or accountability from the New South Wales government. No accountability. And worse still, arising particularly out of a response that we've seen from some of the developments in Victoria, we are seeing a push within the workforce, and I don't think it's an institutional response in juvenile justice, within the workforce to return to the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program model, because they see that kind of aggressive response, that, if you like, that routine, systematic, solitary confinement as a way of reducing incidents in the system, reducing some small groups see it as a way of reducing incidents in the system, reducing detainee on detainee violence, reducing detainee on prison officer violence, and there is a very large movement within parts of the workforce to reinstate a form of the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program. So when we hear about what's happening in Dondale, and we are mortified, and when we hear about some of the incidents that happen in Victoria and we're mortified, let's be aware that New South Wales is not immune to this. The story hasn't been told properly about the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program, and they want it to come back. We need to shine a light on to what happened, shine a light onto the motivations of those people who want it to come back, to ensure that we don't return to those days. Thank you.